CycleSolutions is your one-stop shop for upgrades and service. CycleSolutions, Fort Myers, and CycleSolutions.com. Taking your bike from the street to the strip.
Hi, this is Chris Waddell. You're tuning in to CycleSolutions. I'm up in my shop in Hartford City, Indiana. It is a balmy 20 degrees outside here. Just came from Florida. Got a special project I'm going to kind of ramble on for a while about. This is one of those gigantic jobs. Came in, it's a 2019 Cat Bob. Came in to have a set of carbon fiber wheels that are sitting over there put on it, and one thing led to another, and we have got one hell of a build to do. So, we immediately pulled this thing apart, sent the lower end out, had the counterbalancers removed. Dark Horse did the work in this case. Put the Timken bearing in it, and sent it back. It's all ready to go. It's back in the block. This particular engine, because of the architecture of the case, has to be put back in, or at least it should be put back in instead of building it on a bench, which is what I prefer. So instead, I have quite a gathering here of parts, so kind of talk about what we're going to do. This is a really cool job. So we did a Zippers 128. Customer wanted all the parts diamond cut. Heads are ported, polished. Something super trick about this motor is this is all titanium, and it is specifically set up for the brand new S&S roller rockers. These are a trick. So it changes the lift when these sit down in here with the rollers on them. You have to use special parts. So we actually have, going forward, every single set of heads we're going to do is going to be set up for rollers. We've already installed the fueling ARP studs. This is their stainless caps. Once this motor's assembled, it will have T-Man's billet breather valves in it, and is definitely part of the cure for wet sumping. At the same time, it will also have the fueling vented dipstick that they make specifically for this model. So, as always, we use Fueling's cam plate and their billet oil pump, and it's a whopper in these builds. In this particular case, this is a Zippers 552 cam. And we'll also be using the sprocket Fueling makes. Takes out any slop in terms of timing on the end of the pinion shaft. We're going to increase the injector size to a 7.1 gram injector, and we're going to use a new 70 millimeter throttle body. It's pretty beefy. So, the customer wants a mix of black and chrome, so we're going to do black push rod tubes, chrome centers, adjustable push rods. I prefer them. I like to be able to get back in. We even went so far as to buy the fins that fill in around the spark plugs from Harley, and then I had them diamond cut as well, along with one of our XXX K&P 69s. It's one of our great big oil filter oil coolers, also diamond cut as well. So that's the engine in a nutshell. This bike's going to be tuned with a Thundermax, which is over on our second table over here. Some of the trick goodies that are going into this build. The first thing we're going to do is yank the transmission as soon as the motor's done. I have a Baker grudge box sitting below me to go in. We will also be using the Dark Horse comp sprocket for the customer. So that is a compensator sprocket in this particular case that fits in nicely. He also has the choice of the Evo solid drive, so we're going to see how fitment works. So it's going to be me, or probably wind up being the Evo Industries sprocket. We're going to use the Trask basket, recluse torque drive clutch, and then we have some pretty trick parts for the wheels, which I'll get to. It's a set of Gaffler rotors, duals in the front and a single in the rear. The customer provided me a pretty good looking pulley. I actually don't know what the brand is, but it's pretty trick with bolts and performance machine calipers, both sides up front. Thundermax as always. The customer also brought me a set of shocks by Tubo. Piggyback for the rear. They have a great reputation. I'm interested to see how they work. On the front will be Legends. The trickiest part of this whole job, what led to this gigantic sale, is this thing. BST's carbon fiber wheel, weighs about 2 pounds. The whole ultimately. So the rotational mass of this bike with the lighter wheels, coupled with no counterbalancer to the motor, the balanced welded crank, it'll be unbelievable. Super light as the Harley goes, super powerful as the motor goes, and trick as can be as the suspension goes. So we'll do several videos on this particular build, but that's an overview of a whole bunch of parts, and there's probably some more I forgot laying around here. So talk about the cam chest, crank, lifters, and whatnot. So this was a brand new bike when it was delivered to us. It's only got a couple miles on it, and it's in a million pieces and going back together. We want to talk about the Dark Horse crank here. So these are Dark Horse's rods, so they're not a taper rod, they're a square top rod. Quite a bit more meat at the top for the piston pin, which is stronger, lighter actually. The crank's been balanced and welded, and it's perfectly true. Now, the cam that we're going to use is not available in gear drive, so we're still using chains and tensioners, and I have to say, I haven't seen any tensioner failure in the M8s. This one tensioner that they have inside is actually quite effective, so it's hydraulically driven. Little details on this build. This has the S&S billet tappet cuffs. Talk about the installation technique. When I do them, I use a magnet, and I'll take the magnet and I'll hook it to, or a neodymium magnet, and I'll hook it to the lifter, okay? And while I'm torquing these down, I move them so that I know that I didn't shift the billet block and hold it in the spot. Where it wouldn't want to be, in other words, put friction, undue friction on the actual lifter. The plastic ones that are in here from the factory, you can literally wobble them all over the place, so the lifters just run amok inside. This has the fueling cam plate. It has their oil pump inside of it. Another little trick of the trade. One of my guys stand on the other side when I don't have a top end on it and rotate the motor in a forward direction as smoothly as they can while I very slowly torque down the oil pump bolts to the cam plate. What that does is it centers the oil pump on the crankshaft, draws it to the cam plate so that it's centered to whatever runout there is, except in this case where there really isn't any, but still we use that technique. It has all the ARP bolt kit, with a tensioner on the oil pump and on the cam plates, as well as the sprockets. This thing turns like butter. Just straight as can be. So I'll do a video here a little later and get the top end on it, but you might find this of interest to see what this stuff looks like and why we do what we do. And then I'm going to answer a question somebody posed to me, and I'm not doing this to open up debate, but bottom line is every time I put lifters in, I pump them and pump them and pump them, and I'll pump them some more in the feed. So what it does is it extends the lifter to its full extension internally, and then when we put the push rods in the case of like an S&S quickie adjustable, we'll set them at 3.5 turns from zero lash, meaning we take the push rod, we extend it and spin it until we feel just the slightest amount of resistance, meaning it won't move. Mark it, and then hold it 3.5 turns and lock it. That sets the lifter about in the middle of its travel, so it makes for a quiet engine with plenty of lift when it's running. So that's why we do what we do. I do what I do, and we have no problems because we do it that way every single time. So as you can see, she's grown to the sequences of videos with the fueling cam chest, zippers 552 cam, S&S tappet cuffs, fueling lifters, diamond cut, ported polished, work of art. Now, these heads are set up with titanium retainers, a little lighter than factory, so there's less unsprung weight. So in theory, you'll gain a little bit of power, but more importantly, you can use a S&S forced roller rocker. That is a trick part and hard to come by. This particular piece obviously has two lifter portions, okay? So when this sets down on the pivot shaft, it'll sit in here like so. It sits on top of the valves and opens. Does it nice and smooth with the rollers. It's something we've used in our twin cam big motors for years. So, pretty slick setup. In this particular case, I'll just mock this up. Once this is in, say it's in. This is the T-man breather valve. This particular valve is what we use in every one of these motors to make certain we don't have a motor that wants to sump. And people wonder what this replaces. So this is what it replaces. This is a plastic valve that is what's in these bikes. The crankcase pressure enters right here, goes to a little flapper valve, and ultimately comes out here. The idea for this to work properly, so the sucker in the bottom of the engine, i.e. the sump of the pump, putting the oil back in the tank, this is supposed to let the pressure out but never let any pressure back in. So when you have a pressure wave fluctuating, it creates a pressure wave that fluctuates here. It creates a problem with the oil pump pulling the oil back out constantly and returning it to the tank. So inside of this billet beauty, T-man built, is basically it's almost a two-stroke reed valve in there. Opens, lets the pressure out, slaps shut when the pistons change direction. Doesn't allow air to go back in. This doesn't cure blow by, it's not what it's for. It helps ensure that the oil pump here can remove the oil and put it back in the tank. Because fundamentally it's a dry sump engine that's supposed to be free, but have only a couple ounces of oil in the whole motor when it's running. So we'll be using S&S adjustable push rods inside here. We'll get those in here a little bit later, but we just wanted to do a little follow-up video on what we're doing. As soon as all this is put together, there'll be a 70mm throttle body installed by Horsepower Inc. And we'll be putting a set of 7.1 gram injectors from Zippers on it. Thundermax will take over the tuning. We're doing a carbon fiber D&D Bobcat on this bike, a 2-in-1, and it'll have carbon fiber wheels and a whole bunch of other goodies. I love adjusting the push rods. I've got the intake Plenum on. I just wanted to point out just how big and nasty that is. But first we'll talk about a couple things here. This is the S&S. I set them at 3.5 from zero lash. In this case I'm using a mixture of black and chrome because of the diamond cut. So it's going to be black, chrome, black, chrome, black, chrome, black. You know, the devil's in the details, so to speak. The S&S roller rockers are installed. Bring the camera up closer, you can see them. I use more than enough, sometimes too much assembly lube, and I prefer the Lucas brand, super tacky. It stays where you put it. So this is the fueling stud and nut kit. Those are individually installed, and then the nuts are brought down, thread Loctite, and locked down at 27 foot-pounds. Had zero problems. Here's an installed T-man crankcase breather valve, R rear, F front. You see the size of the intake plenum, and you actually shine it up inside, and you can see just how big the mouth of this thing really is. And we're using a 70mm in this case because this fellow wants as much as he can possibly get, and he's going to get it. This is the stock intake plenum. A lot of people know about this plastic molded piece. I have seen more than my fair share that are literally melted right here from the heat of the cylinder head. This one has only got about 40 miles on it. But so this is what appears to be two pieces that are sort of glued and melted together. Somewhat intricate design, but nowhere near that right there. The 55mm throttle body. So this is a 70mm. Hold it up for sake of example. All the electronics are straight out of this bike, out of a Harley. It's all put together so the bike doesn't know that anything's been changed. The injectors in this case are 7.1 grams, so using a Thundermax we can tell it exactly what to do. The bike will start and run seamlessly. So here you have this, and for sake of example, in regards to the actual throttle body, the stalker. I would say it's darn near twice as big, literally, if you were to do the math. So, same drive components, all billet, cast, and plastic. So, this this is a power adder for sure. So we'll get this thing all buttoned up, throttle body in place, lids on, oil lines ran, and we'll move on to the next part of this bike, which is the suspension and the wheel. Motor's done. We're working on the driveline. Yesterday we installed a Baker grudge box in here. And to solidify the connection between the crankshaft and the tranny, in this particular case we've used the Dark Horse Man of War comp sprocket. So what's pretty trick about this is it's the only comp sprocket that's technically rebuildable. It's got neoprene bushings inside of it. It also has a spacer on the front that catches oil, feeds oil inside the sprocket, so it actually lubricates the neoprene bushings. So that can be taken apart, 4 screws here come off, separates, and then you can replace them. Honestly, I haven't had any customers give me any feedback as to having had to replace them, but they can be rebuilt. So the basket is a billet trax basket. We use them because they build them for their turbo applications, so they're especially well suited for a huge horsepower and torque naturally aspirated motor like this one is. It doesn't have a clutch in it right now. The clutch of choice in this particular case for this particular gentleman is he wants to do the Recluse automatic, the EXP. This particular one is the RMS 6208, a brand new part number from Recluse. Basically it's a torque drive clutch. It has all of their plates, both fiber and steel. And then it has what's called the EXP, or the expansion ring. And the trick about this is basically this is sitting here inside, and as the engine's sitting there at idle, the springs that force it to stay to open or to close. So when it goes over 1200 RPM, they expand out like your hand would be letting out on the clutch, and away it goes. So basically it's kind of a reverse lockup. So it allows a person with, say, carpal tunnel or problems with their hand holding a clutch in to sit there at idle and not move, give it gas, and it goes. You still have to shift, but and use the clutch a bit to shift, but that's kind of how that works. In this particular case, we're going to try this bike with the stock tensioner, given the amount of horsepower it makes. I like to see what it's like with this before I put a Hayden tensioner in it. The Hayden goes up and down. This one just gets tighter for the most part. Very little backwards play, but this particular tensioner in the M8 sets the thing right about 3/8 automatically, and it seems to do a decent job. The choice between this sprocket, the Baker compensator, or the Evo Industries solid drive, in this particular case customer wanted the Dark Horse. It has a Dark Horse crank, so he wanted the Dark Horse compensator. But the solid drive, I have to say, is very light. This particular one in my hand is made for a breakout. In other words, a bike with a much wider tire. So currently for like the breakout, it's the only piece out there that will allow you to upgrade the compensator, in this case to a delete. This particular extension here would slide onto the sprocket shaft of the crankshaft and extend it out. And it literally extends it out to about the width of the teeth of the sprocket. Those particular bikes, because they're wider in the rear, have everything set out to the side. So that's a pretty trick part. We stock this from Evo Industries, and of course they make it for the regular applications, bagger and whatnot. They do come with a spacer that you have to use in the case of this bike, but like on the twin cams, depending on the area, you do or do not use a spacer. Something else nice about the Evo sprocket is if you have like an 07 or 08 or heck a early 2010 that has the original stator and rotor in it, that has the spring cup welded to it, you can take the springs out of the cup and then slide this right in, and you don't have to replace all the internals in the charging system. We see that a lot. People ask, well, doesn't that damage your transmission to put a solid sprocket instead of having something that gives? Well, what we've found, and I think a lot of people have found, is if you use the Hayden tensioner, which is this piece here. The thing about the Hayden is once it's installed inside, it can go both up and down because it has a pair of springs in it. And you can adjust the tension through a series of shims that they provide with it as well. And when it's time to replace the pad, you just chuck it, grab another one, stick it back on there, stick it in, and away you go. It's very smooth. I will say one thing about the Hayden, it does make kind of a whirling sound when it runs because it's following the chain every second. It's a pretty nice part. We sell a lot of them. So tune in for another episode of this particular bike. We're about to do the Legends front forks this morning. Tracy did performance machine brakes. We have a set of carbon fiber BST wheels that are going on this bike. We've also already got in the rear suspension. That particular piece is made by a company called Tubo. And we got some pretty cool stuff. This bike is getting a set of carbon fiber BST wheels, Gaffler rotors. They weigh nothing. Gorgeous. The talk today, though, is more focused on the suspension. Customer supplied I believe it was a Tubo rear suspension, rear shock. It's in here. Don't sell them, don't know much about it, but that's what he wanted, so it's in here. But what we do sell are the Legends. So this is the Legends front end for the inverted forks. To be quite honest, it's the first set I've ever done, so I had to invest in some tools to do it. First thing I had to get was a special socket for this particular leg that allows me to reach down in and safely remove the locking mechanism that keeps the fork together. So we're going to test out how that works, but if Jim's makes a tool, the tool works. I also had to buy this unique wrench. It's a 40mm wrench. It's made by Martin. Proto makes one as well. So that particular one, when you go back and put this cartridge in, gets to here so you can tighten everything down. So one of the tricks of the trade for any front end, and we do a lot of front ends, is just have the right tools. So people ask me what we use. I have a set of tools from Matco, which are adaptable, and you can use them on an impact. They're impact quality, so you can pop this in, say, here, hit it a little bit with an impact to get it going, then you can safely remove it slowly using a palm ratchet, because this stuff's under pressure, so you don't want to pop yourself in the forehead. That'd hurt, or knock a tooth out. But when this is all done, this bike's going to be super trick. See the side of the bike as it looks now. Incidentally, we figured out working with carbon fiber wheels in the frozen tundra of Indiana at our shop up there was not too much fun, so we brought them down here where it's 85 and sunny. So even went so far as the performance machine brakes. This is all diamond cut. This thing's really trick. Got all the rock when we're done. Certainly a whole lot less rotational mass. So this is the left side fork, and this is all the OEM crap that came out of it. It's the first time I've ever seen this stuff, so it's nice learning something new, but kind of cool. The other fork, the right hand side, is totally different. So quite honestly, smacked it with an impact with this specific tool. Pieces come right apart, safely taken apart, pull the parts apart, bring it together, drop the entire cartridge in, go back in with the bolt, smack it with an impact. After you've threaded it in, away you go. You're done at that point. We have 8.5 ounces per the instructions of fluid they provide. So we'll go ahead and put it in here, raise it up, snug it down, and that fork will be done. Literally that easy. That's the other one that's hard. So this is when the right tool is worth all the money it costs. So you pay for it the first job, you make money the second. Alright? This is the Jim's tool. Basically, I was led to believe that you would get one serious ass whooping when you took this apart. It's not the case. So we went in on this fork. This is the right fork leg. We used the impact, dropped the piece on the top, busted this loose, okay, took it out, and came right off of here. There's a nut here that holds it on, so we broke that free, pulled this off, set it to the side, removed this. This is the tool that would slide down here, okay, and lock in. Then it comes with a washer and another nut, okay. So basically you run this all the way down, which compresses the top out spring here, makes it so you can bust it all loose. We then, when it was completely snugged down, drop the appropriate socket on top here, hit it with an impact to loosen it up. I always switch over and use a palm ratchet and a towel. I'm on the receiving end. Tracy here gets to hold it and maintain control of it. We don't use the Parks tool which holds it. Those are nice. No, we don't have one. So anyway, it all came apart. Dropped the fluid out. This has the cartridge already in it. This particular piece will go down in here. We're going to put the fluid in first before we tighten it down. It'll be easier. It's not going to leak out the bottom. And then that's where the 40mm tool comes in. It's thin and it'll allow us to take it down and snug it all up. We'll rise this up, spin it down tight, smack it, bounce it a couple times, and we're done. I've already got the just over 5 ounces of fluid here to go in it. It's different because there's a different amount of internals in each one of these. That's why the measurement's different. But the jug is supplied and there's plenty of fluid to get both forks done. So we're going to put it back together. It was actually kind of nice to learn something new. So fun stuff, man. For what it's worth, if anybody wants this done on the road, any one of our shows or in our shop, let us know. We own the tools and we now have the experience and understanding how this works. So very good. Tons of details went into this. Starting with the obvious, the motor. It's a diamond cut, zipper stage 5, 128-inch kit. In this particular case, we used a 552 lift cam. It has the new S&S forged roller rockers in it. It's been obviously ported, polished. It has a 70mm HPI throttle body. That is one big throttle body. Arlen Ness's breather. And T-Man's breather valves. Pretty much, literally, anything and everything I could possibly put into and onto this motor was done. Bottom end is a Dark Horse crank, Dark Horse compensator, fueling oil pump, cam plate, S&S tappet cuffs, fueling lifters, S&S push rods. The list goes on and on. Here we have the Baker Grudge box. That looks super in there in the black and silver. Fueling's vented dipstick. This is a bi-tubo adjustable shock in the rear. The front forks. This is an inverted fork on this one. It's the first time I've ever done one. We did a video about it. It's a pretty cool job. Glad I did it. I know I'll be doing more. We did the Legends internal cartridges. Doesn't look any different on the outside except for the tops, but it is. The brakes are courtesy of Gaffler's floating rotors, and we have Performance Machines monoblocks. They're a 4-piston caliper. The wheels are BST carbon fiber wheels. He chose some of the Harley Davidson style tires for the bike. The customer carried them in. Moving towards the back, that is one gorgeous wheel. I mean, the carbon fiber, the weave here happens to match the D&D Bobcat in the carbon fiber. Super trick bike. I can't wait to ride the bike. Coming around to the other side, we still have this bike hooked up so we can tap into it remotely through a USB link for the Thundermax, which is what we use to tune. We have a map that's already done, so it's spot on. And in fact, this bike should work flawlessly with the Grudge box because we are enabled properly through software for it to have the correct gear indication. To have a nice billet rear pulley. Again, we have Dark Horse comp sprocket inside of here. We have a Trask billet basket. We have the Recluse automatic clutch. It's a brand new model for this bike. I think the part number is 6208. It adjusts different than all the others. It seems like every time they come out with something new it's a bit different. Some of the details, for example, we have a set of the billet fins here for the spark plugs that were diamond cut to match, as well as one of our XXX KMP X69 filters in diamond cut. So it's all in the details. I'll go ahead and start this bike so you can hear what it sounds like. It definitely barks. And it starts. one hell of a fun job, this one was. If you want to be notified when new videos from Cycle Solutions are released, hit the like and subscribe button to follow us.